The Project Hail Mary movie's dropping in one day, and everyone on the internet claims that's one of the best books to have ever graced the earth. But I have my doubts, because 3 years ago, I tried to read the book. But after reading to the 8% mark, I left an update on Goodreads that said, God, this book is so cringe. The writing style is like 5th grade level. So naturally, I decided that this year I'd commit to reading the entire book so that I could break it down for all of you guys that want to know the gritty details without committing 8 hours to reading the novel yourself. So let's get to it. First of all, oh my gosh, I don't have any rings on. Oh man. Today is St. Patrick's Day, so I'm wearing green, and look at my skirt. It's genuinely the best skirt I own. I love it so much. But we're not here to talk about my outfit choices. We're here to talk about Project Hail Mary, and I'm only 6% through. It's actually been 2 days, and I haven't been wanting to read it because who was gonna tell me it's so damn goofy? And I hope there's some kind of reasoning for why it's kind of silly, because everyone online raves about this book, and they literally recommend this book to anyone. Like they say, if your brother wants to read, if your boyfriend wants to read, if somebody that never reads wants to read, they will like Project Hail Mary. And I'm a reader, so why don't I like it? Like, why am I not liking it? It's almost reading like YA, but worse. Like if a YA author was bad, that's what this book is giving right now. Basically, we're following this man who wakes up in some kind of space chamber, potentially a rocket ship, I don't even know. He wakes up, realizes that he's naked, but he's also super weak, and he can't get himself off the bed. And also there's this kind of robot arm that's feeding him and kind of keeping him in place so that he doesn't hurt himself. And he keeps having flashbacks to conversations that he had previously. And that's kind of where we're getting plot information, like the fact that he's a scientist and the fact that I think he's on a mission to figure out why the sun's energy is depleting and why there's an infrared light growing brighter by the day in space. Something like that. I really don't know what I'm reading about exactly. All I know is it's weird and it's goofy. And let me give you guys some examples because I need to see if I'm just being dramatic or if you guys also agree. So the main character has said things like, oh, come on, who pooped in your Rice Krispies? It hurts like a mother fluffer. Time to get a look at my fellow patients. I don't know who I am or why I'm here, but at least I'm not alone. And they're dead. Like it's giving Disney. Everyone check your pockets. I just have a quarter, a piece of string, and a raisin. I don't think that's a raisin. Like that's literally the vibe. So I don't know if I'm gonna like it very much. And right now, like I said, I'm not. But don't worry, I have more highlights. He described his as his gentleman's equipment. He said, what in the fudge is going on? But then he called himself out about saying what in the fudge and said maybe he has kids and that's why he was censoring himself like that. So like I've said, maybe some of this can be explained away, but for right now, it's just annoying me. Whenever the robot told him that food allotment for this meal has been met, he says, bah. I don't know, am I being judgmental? And then finally, another goofy Disney scene. Bro says, I think my eyes are closed. That's not so bad. All I have to do is open them. I try, but nothing happens. Why can't I open my eyes? Open and open. Open, dang it. Oh, I felt a wiggle that time. My eyelids moved. I felt it. Open. My eyelids creep up and blinding light sears my retinas. Like, why are we goofy? Why are we goofy? Why are we actually being goofy? Because he's just woken up in a space chamber. Like, he doesn't know where he is. He determined that the gravity in the chamber that he's in is way too high to be on Earth, and he's not freaking out. Instead, he's being goofy. I don't know. I don't know. I'm not liking it very much, clearly. But we're at 6%. So maybe this book has hope. I hope I don't DNF it. I've only ever DNF'd 2 books ever in my life, but the fact that I'm even bringing that up right now makes me very scared. But as always, I'll update you guys as soon as I have more thoughts. For now, that's all I have to say. I'm wearing my hair in a ponytail today. I don't think I've ever worn a ponytail on my channel. It's already giving me the worst headache, hence why I never wear one. But today I just feel like changing that up. I don't know. I'm really excited to update you guys that I'm 22% through the book and I'm actually really enjoying it now. I was not liking it, as you guys know, because it was very corny and it still is corny. The main character gives a kind of dad vibe and it is starting to grow on me a bit. He is becoming a bit endearing and I realized that the reason why he gives off that vibe is because he's a middle school teacher, so it all makes sense now. I've actually learned a ton of information about him being Ryland Grace, Dr. Ryland Grace, as I've learned, and this doctor is on a suicide mission in space. Yes, you heard that right. He is a middle school teacher risking his life for science. So basically, there's been a recent scientific development that has deduced that there may be life in the solar system outside of the Earth. So obviously, this is a crazy groundbreaking discovery, and apparently, Dr. Grace wrote a scientific paper when he was in his his years of academia, and someone super high up in a space governmental branch reaches out to him because in this paper he talked about how he thinks it could be possible for life to exist without water, and this new possible alien life form has been found living on the surface of the sun. So obviously, it's safe to assume that if there's an organism on the sun, it probably isn't comprised of water, because how on earth would it possibly live at such intense heat temperatures? So they bring this teacher to a lab and they give him these organisms, which are actually microscopic. They're little tiny black dots, but they move around every once in a while. And he basically starts conducting a ton of science experiments on these little guys, and I don't really understand how he's both a teacher and doing all this lab work. Like, he's mid-lecture and he tells the students, okay, it's a study hall, and then he just leaves and goes to the lab. So I don't really understand how that's happening, but I digress. He's doing all these science experiments on these little black dots, and he actually determines that these organisms are mostly water, which is crazy because you would think they wouldn't be able to exist on the sun. But as it turns out, these little organisms are able to maintain a standard temperature of 96.514, I believe. And no matter what happens, this temperature does not change. He also figures out that whenever they're poked with a microscopic needle, they die, but they also turn translucent in the process. So he was able to see what these organisms are comprised of, and they actually have a nucleus, a mitochondria, and other organelles. So they're almost similar to life on Earth, like bacteria or mold outbreaks, stuff like that, little tiny organisms that live on Earth. They're kind of similar, but obviously these organisms, which he's named astrophage, actually live on the surface of the sun. And they actually commute across the solar system to Venus in order to repopulate. And the scientific community has deduced this because there has been an infrared beam growing brighter in the solar system as the sun dims. So life on Earth is at dramatic risk because, as you guys probably know, the sun is our life source. So if the sun's energy is diminished in any regard, it will start to affect all the planets in our solar system, especially Earth because there's so much life within it. So obviously this mission is incredibly important. And through talking with other scientists, Grace figures out that the project is called Project Hail Mary. And through this project, scientists are going to be sent to space with their target being a sun that hasn't yet been affected by these little microbes. Because basically these little microorganisms, this astrophage, is almost attacking stars, and they're traveling amongst the stars in space, almost infesting them like mold spores. And they usually leave a sun after they've diminished 10% of its energy and brightness. So it's safe to assume that all of these little astrophage spores that are living on the sun are going to take its energy until it's 10% diminished. And if that's the case, life on Earth will cease to exist. We need the sun desperately, and without its energy, everyone is assumed to die. So this Project Hail Mary that Dr. Grace has been informed of is the most important project. And since he's just a middle school teacher, the government is more likely to get him involved in the project and in these experiments because honestly, he's disposable in their eyes. So it's less of a risk to send him on a project like this than someone that they actually hold in high regard. But obviously, he's not just a middle school teacher. He actually has his doctorate, and he is really smart. And that's obvious through the text because although he explains everything in such simple terms, it's clear that he knows what he's talking about. So the text has been pretty full of science and math, but because he breaks it down to such a digestible degree, it's pretty easy for the reader to understand what's going on. Although I don't know how actually scientifically accurate any of the information is. I'm not involved in the space, so it sounds pretty realistic to me. So basically, the astrophase is taking energy from the sun, flying through space to Venus because Venus is a source of CO2, and they need CO2 apparently in order to divide. And because they're singular-celled organisms, that's how they reproduce. So all of these science-y governmental figures are wanting Dr. Grace to create a contraption in which the astrophase can multiply, so they could basically farm this microorganism in order to fuel a rocket that could send Dr. Grace to space to that star that's not being affected, so they can determine what about that star makes these little microorganisms not attack it. Because I can assume that they want whatever that immune star has so that they can put it on our star, which is our sun, so that life on Earth can be sustained. So the stakes are really, really high. And he also went with 2 other people, but as I read in that passage in the first section of the book, both of them have died. So he is on a solo mission, bound for death, for the sake of science. And I can assume that the reason why he was so willing to go on this mission is because of his classroom and because of all the kids he's taught before this year, because he really does seem to care about his classroom of students and kids in general, although he did leave them that random day, which was really odd, but in the book it says he loves kids so much. So it's safe to assume that not only does he want to save his classroom of children, but he also wants to save everyone on Earth. So very noble. I hope he doesn't die, obviously, but that's kind of the direction the book is going. So we'll see what happens, but as always, I will update you guys as soon as I find out more information. Bye for now. I'm officially 44% through this book and I've learned so much since we last spoke, so I need to update you guys. Just as some general context around the book, we're actually diving between the past timeline where he's starting this adventure and the present timeline when he's in the midst of this Hail Mary project. So in the past timeline, he's actually at a science lab in the Chinese Sea. Because they're working with such extensive amounts of energy, they want to be far from civilization, so they're in the middle of the ocean doing all of these science experiments with astrophage in order to get the energy. But in the present timeline, he's actually commuted all the way to a new solar system, the Tai Ceti solar system, and that's the sun that hasn't been affected by astrophase. And as it turns out, according to his rocket's information, he has been traveling for 3 years to reach the solar system, but on Earth, it's been 13. So by the time he collects the data he needs and sends it back to Earth, it will have been a minimum of 26 years since the project started. So hopefully the people on Earth are okay, because keep in mind, this entire time, astrophage is taking energy from our sun, or the star Sol. So imagine how much dimmer it would be within 26 years. Probably an amount that's actually affecting the people of Earth, but I guess that's something that we'll find out by the end of the book. At least I hope it's something we'll find out. We also found out that at the beginning of this Hail Mary project, all 3 crew members that were chosen were almost a genetic miracle, because as you probably know, putting people in an extended coma can be incredibly dangerous because you could just die. So they had to pick people with the genetic sequence that would allow them to be put into a coma without suffering any negative consequences. And these people are incredibly rare. 1 in 7,000 people rare. And obviously they also need to be highly qualified scientists, and they have to be okay with committing their life to science, because keep in mind, Project Hail Mary is a suicide mission. And somehow Dr. Grace was one of these people. What are the odds? And speaking of Dr. Grace, I actually never thought about what it would feel like to experience zero gravity, but he actually talks about it pretty extensively, because whenever he entered into this new solar system, the gravity that was originally in his ship stopped and zero gravity took over. And I didn't realize that it might feel like that stomach drop feeling that you get when you go on a roller coaster, but that's how he described it. And he even threw up because the sensation was so strong. So that just really got me thinking about space, because I never even thought that it would be a negative sensation or it would feel like you're falling, but it makes perfect sense, because if gravity wasn't there to hold you down, I guess it would just feel like you're free floating. But all that aside, we've actually come to the most incredibly interesting part of the book, because he's actually come in contact with an alien species. Yep, he's come in contact with aliens, the first human ever. He basically saw little bursts of light on his infrared monitor, and he realized that it was actually astrophage powering another spacecraft, and a spacecraft that was using all flat sides. And on Earth, we obviously use a lot of curvature because it helps things be aerodynamic, so it obviously wasn't familiar to him. And so he starts motioning with his plane, like doing little gestures, and their aircraft is copying it. So he's like, oh my god, these aliens like are communicating with me kind of. And there was a little robot hand on their spacecraft, and they end up launching a little cylinder to his spacecraft. So he like gets all suited up and he goes out there and catches it, because they sent it over at a really, really slow pace. It was actually the pace that he was motioning his aircraft with, and it was like a super slow pace. So they send this cylinder over, he catches it, he brings it inside, and it's so hot and it reeks of ammonia. He eventually opens it, and whenever he scans it with his lab equipment, it's actually made of an element that on Earth we only perceive as a gas. Like, we've never been able to make it a 3D element, but obviously these aliens live in a different atmosphere that allows that. So it's basically an incredibly sturdy metal, and they've made a model of the suns in the universe. And based on the arrangement of these little tiny suns, he determines that they're from the Arandani solar system, because their sun would be 40 Arandani. And so he ends up sculpting a little Earth with iron, and he puts it into their model, and then he ends up going back onto his ship and sending it across to them. And then when the aliens receive this, they create a new model of a large spacecraft, which is theirs, and his spacecraft, which is a lot smaller, and they have a little tunnel connecting from his exit point to theirs. So they want to meet him through some kind of tunnel system. And the craziest part is they end up doing that. So they move their spacecraft over, they create some kind of tunnel system that they use their robot hand to attach to his spacecraft, and now there's a tunnel connecting them, and they have to do a lot of scientific finagling of the air, and there is actually some kind of wall in between them, because they don't yet know what the other's atmosphere is. So obviously they can't just open the doors to each of their aircrafts, because who knows what that would do in the middle of space. But they are so smart about it, and they're able to eventually create some kind of air chamber where Dr. Grace can approach the vessel, and there's a little clear opening that that he can see through into their spacecraft, and for one, it's completely pitch black in there. These aliens don't use light because they might not see light like we do. He actually suspects that they might use infrared or ultraviolet rays in order to see, or maybe they actually use sound and echolocation. So since Dr. Grace can see through this little clear gap into their spaceship, he actually sees the creature that's inside. So let me read his direct quote, because this creature is quite difficult to describe. If I had to give a description, I would say a giant rock spider with no eyes. But let's see how he describes him. Rocky, which is what he's named this alien creature, is smaller than a human. He's about the size of a Labrador. He has 5 legs radiating out from a central carapace looking thing. The carapace, which is roughly a pentagon, is 18 inches across and half as thick. I don't see eyes or a face anywhere. Each leg has a joint in the middle, I'll call it an elbow. Each leg, or should I say arm, ends in a hand, so he's got 5 hands. Each hand has those triangular fingers I got a good look at last time. Looks like all 5 hands are the same. I don't see any front or back to him. He appears to be pentagonally symmetrical. He wears clothing. The legs are bare, showing the rock-like skin, but there's cloth on the carapace, sort of like a shirt with 5 armholes. I don't know what the shirt is made of, but it looks thicker than typical human clothing. It's a dull greenish brown and inconsistently shaded. The top of the shirt has a large open hole, like where the neck goes on a human's t-shirt. That hole is smaller than the carapace, so he must have put that shirt on by pulling it downward and sliding the arms through their respective holes, again, like a human shirt. But there's no neck or head to go through the hole on top, just a hard-looking rocky pentagon that sticks up a little bit from the crusty skin. He basically looks nothing like a human, which obviously is to be expected. I feel like if we found alien life, they would almost certainly not look how we've depicted them in movies. So I do think that was an interesting description by Andy Weir. And I also think it's incredibly important that Andy's described these alien creatures as being incredibly intelligent, because in order to have commuted from their solar system to the one they're currently in, that would take a lot of brains. It might be a different level of understanding and execution than humans would have done, but these aliens have done it. So they're clearly very, very intelligent. And that much is obvious when we get scenes of them interacting together. If anything, Dr. Grace seems a little bit more dumb than Rocky. So that's been pretty interesting to read about, because they're starting to develop a language between each other now. So at first, like I described, they communicate through a lot of sculpture. And at one point, Rocky even sends through this beaded necklace looking thing, but Dr. Grace determines that he's actually trying to communicate through the shape of atoms. So based on the count of beads on this string, he determines that Rocky was communicating the atmosphere of his planet and the atmosphere inside his ship to Dr. Grace, because he realized that Dr. Grace's air is comprised of oxygen at a much, much, much lower pressure than Rocky's used to, because basically Rocky's atmosphere is highly pressurized ammonia. So pressurized that if Dr. Grace went into his plane, he would die. The pressure in Rocky's ship is almost equivalent to being 1,000 feet deep under the ocean. So most likely, they're not going to ever be able to be in the same room as each other, but they have been able to communicate through this tunnel system. And like I explained, there is a clear wall in between them, but they've basically created a small airlock system in the middle of their tunnel where they can put a trinket in the hole, then it gets airlocked and pressurized, and then it opens on the other side, so they can actually give each other things through that little passageway. And it's actually really cute because they're absolutely becoming friends, although obviously it is a pretty weird relationship because Rocky communicates through notes. So he's basically singing a little tune, and then Dr. Grace is saying the word in English. Dr. Grace is cataloging it all in his computer, and he's creating a system that basically translates Rocky's notes into human language, and somehow Rocky is able to just memorize what Dr. Grace says. So his mind and ability to recollect sound is a lot sharper than Dr. Grace's or any other humans. Dr. Grace at this point had been up for like 48 hours and he had not taken any rest, but he eventually has to communicate to Rocky that he needs sleep, and Rocky actually asks if Dr. Grace will just sleep there in the tube so that he could observe him, and Dr. Grace does it without question really. But eventually, like a day later, whenever Rocky actually wants to sleep, he asks for Dr. Grace to observe him, and Dr. Grace declines at first because he's like, why would I need to? But then he does after Rocky explains that that's what they do on their planet. Like that's their cultural norm, to watch each other sleep, I guess. And that's when I knew that they were actually becoming friends. And further along that same line of thought, we also discovered that Rocky was of a crew of 23 other creatures, but they all passed away on their trip to this solar system. And like Rocky, Dr. Grace has also lost crew members. He lost those 2 other crewmates that were dead when he woke up in his ship. So obviously they have that shared grief to bond over, because I do assume they're going to be good friends. They're in the middle of space. They're both on suicide missions, probably. I don't know how long this little guy is gonna live, but Dr. Grace isn't going to live forever. So I don't really know where this is going, but I'm absolutely invested and I'm very much interested to keep reading, and I cannot wait to be able to pick the book back up again. I am a little bit worried that every time I come back, I have such extensive notes to relay to you guys, but it has been pretty easy to convey. So far, Andy Weir is doing a good job at communicating such extensive information in a super digestible way, so I can absolutely understand why so many people have recommended this book. Although at the beginning, I really was not seeing where you guys were coming from. But like I said, I'm enjoying it, so I'm gonna read more of the book and I'll update you guys as soon as I have more information. Hi guys, I'm back. It feels like I've been gone for so long because yesterday I went to the bars with my friends. It was actually my first double date ever. But the crazy thing is I'm only 24 and I swear to God my body cannot do alcohol anymore. Yesterday was basically wasted because I just felt so sluggish and off, and honestly, I'm still feeling that a little bit. So that's why my energy's low. But it's time to update you guys about the book because I've read a gigantic chunk since we last spoke. I'm now 80% through and I took a ton of notes so that I could update you guys because it's pretty crazy where this book has gone. Oh my God, there's a giant bald eagle in the sky. That is actually crazy. Okay, so basically a climatologist has predicted that Earth has 19 years left before half of its population is wiped out, and obviously the remaining half would be starving and there would be tons of weird climate disasters happening, so it wouldn't be a very satisfying way to live. So obviously they need to act quickly, and the head lady in charge, Strat, is basically like, yeah, that's not gonna work. We need to start pumping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere because basically all these giant industries that we have burn fossil fuels, and that actually negatively impacts our atmosphere because it makes it so much more hot than it usually is, thus global warming. But in this situation, they actually need those greenhouse gases to keep the atmosphere warm enough so that the reduction in the sun's temperature and rays doesn't affect them nearly as bad. And also, they're starting to detonate gigantic bombs deep in Antarctica's ice to basically chip up the entire continent so that all the ice pieces melt into the ocean, because apparently Antarctica used to be a jungle, so all of that plant and animal life still exists on that continent. It's just buried under layers of ice. So if they chip it off and melt it in the ocean, all of that methane will be released and it will help with the global warming of the planet. So on Earth, before Project Hail Mary blasted off into space, they were trying their best to combat the effects of their depleting sun supply. And on Project Hail Mary in the future, or the present, I guess, Rocky and Dr. Grace are starting to learn about each other and become friends. I told you guys that they developed a shared language. At this point in the story, Grace doesn't even really have to refer to his notes anymore because they've been talking so frequently. It's kind of becoming second nature to him. So he's basically learning Iridian language, which is pretty cool. Rocky is basically an Iridian engineer, and although the engineering he does isn't the same as human engineering, he does have a lot of knowledge that would be helpful in the Project Hail Mary ship. So Rocky decides that he's going to build a contraption that would allow him to live in the Project Hail Mary ship. Like, they're basically gonna ditch Rocky's ship and make a climate within Project Hail Mary that allows Rocky to live alongside Dr. Grace. So they're basically gonna be roommates. And why do I feel literally maternal towards Rocky? Like, he's so cute to me. I don't know if he's actually cute. Like, I think when I see the movie, I'm gonna be scared of him probably. But right now, I feel so maternal towards him. He's so cute. Every time that he asks a question in the book, he says question at the end. So he'll literally be like, how old are you, question? And I don't know, it sounds so cute. Like, he just doesn't know how to speak English, but it's so cute. I love him. So because they've determined that the human ship is actually the more valuable one because of all the science equipment within it, Rocky starts basically moving in. So he's like piling all the stuff that he wants to bring into the tunnel so that Dr. Grace can haul it into his ship. We also learned that Rocky's been stuck in the Tau Ceti solar system for 46 years. But it's okay because apparently Iridians live an average of 689 years, and Rocky is only 291, so he's got a lot more life to live. At this point in the story, Dr. Grace also explained to Rocky that he's basically on a suicide mission, and that was super confusing to Rocky because Rocky plans to go back to his planet. But on Earth, Dr. Grace and all of his scientists were only able to make a certain amount of astrophage because on Earth, this mission is dramatic. Like I said, people are going to die soon, so they had no time to double the amount of astrophage they had. They just had to send him out. But once Rocky learns about this, he actually admits that he has a ton of astrophage stored up, and he offers to give it to Dr. Grace so that he can return home. So this is no longer a suicide mission. Dr. Grace is going to be able to go home as long as everything works out properly. And so far, everything is going swimmingly. Because Rocky brought all of his useful supplies to the Project Hail Mary ship, he starts building basically like a hamster tunnel system around the entire spaceship so that he can be everywhere Dr. Grace is, but in a climate controlled environment. Because remember, Rocky and Mr. Grace cannot survive in the same environment. Rocky's atmosphere is comprised of ammonia and it's super highly pressurized. And obviously Dr. Grace's is oxygen with a really, really, really low pressure. So they have to remain separate, but they're able to see each other because the material that Rocky builds with is clear. So Mr. Grace always knows where Rocky is, and Rocky knows where Mr. Grace is regardless of if the material is clear because he sees through sound. So he knows exactly where everything is without having to see it with eyes, which is really freaking cool. So now they're both working together to solve the astrophage problem. And in order to do this, they're hovering over a planet called Adrian, and that's the planet where all the astrophage is traveling from Tau Ceti. So they take a sample of the astrophage in that atmosphere, and they determine that the population on both sides of the sample coming from the sun to Adrian and then from Adrian to the sun, are actually the same. And that wouldn't be the case if the population was actually multiplying at the planet. So they have to figure out why these populations are the same. And they basically determined that there must be life on planet Adrian that is eating or killing the astrophage and keeping the population stable. And that's what allows their sun, Tau Ceti, to be completely okay in their atmosphere. There's basically a natural predator built into this ecosystem that keeps the astrophage at bay. So they obviously need that predator. They need to collect that predator and take it back to their respective planets in order to control the population of astrophage. But in order to collect this natural predator, it's not going to be an easy task because they've basically determined that this predator lives a lot deeper in the Adrian atmosphere than they were expecting to go. And Project Hail Mary cannot travel that deep into the atmosphere without the ship being crushed. So they have to figure something else out entirely. They end up building this chain link system that takes them like 2 weeks, working every day from morning to evening. But at the end of this chain link system, there's a ball that collects the atmospheric air and then closes once it's full. And it actually works. They're able to collect this sample, but because of the angle their ship's at and because of how intense the astrophage is burning, their ship is basically melting and it ends up burning a hole through their ship and releasing their astrophage. Because remember, they're at a planet where astrophage is basically home to. This ecosystem is natural for the astrophage. And so once they see that planet, Adrian, where they can breed, they just start leaving the ship in droves. They're leaving. And remember, this is the fuel supply for Project Hail Mary. So the ship is going to start falling if they don't find a way to get out of that atmospheric zone. Because all the astrophage are leaving and they're starting to fall into this atmosphere, the gravity is insane in the ship. And that's completely fine for Rocky because he's used to the atmospheric pressure being high, but for Dr. Grace, he's basically dying. Like, he can't breathe, his lungs can't open properly, and a chair actually slams into his back and is basically pressing into him. He's literally nodding out, and then someone pulls the chair off of him. And who is it other than Rocky? But keep in mind, Rocky cannot be safe in Dr. Grace's atmosphere, so Rocky's literally dying now too. Dr. Grace can breathe again, but now Rocky can't. So Rocky basically risked his life to save Dr. Grace. Grace is able to turn on the centrifugal rotation of the ship so that some of the gravity is basically dispersed, so it lowers the gravitational pull that he's experiencing. But because of this, the ship is basically upside down, which actually makes it a lot easier for Dr. Grace to lift Rocky, because in this atmosphere, I think he was like 200 pounds or something, and he's usually 800 on his home planet. So thank God he wasn't that heavy, or else he literally would have died. Because the gravity is lower, Dr. Grace hauls Rocky up ladders and ladders back to his controlled atmospheric hamster tunnels, and he puts him inside. But Dr. Grace does this at the expense of his own health because Rocky's environment is incredibly dangerous to Dr. Grace. So as soon as he opens the door to put Rocky inside, the ammonia air blasts onto his body and gives him such severe burns. And also it like burns his eyes and other things. So the robot arms start administering pain medication to Dr. Grace. He basically risks his life to save Rocky, who saved his life by risking his life, if that makes any sense. So they're both just risking their lives for each other. They obviously care about each other a lot, and they're the only other life form that they have to communicate with. So whether or not it's insanity, they're doing it, and it's really cute. Rocky, though, is not doing good. He's basically dead, or at least it seems like that. But Dr. Grace doesn't know enough about the alien anatomy to help him. He tries to build some kind of like air condition unit that blows what looks like soot off of Rocky's little vents that he has. But we learn later that that was actually scabs forming to help Rocky. So Dr. Grace literally just blew off something that was actually helping Rocky. So they clearly don't know enough about each other yet to actually be helpful towards one another when they're in pain, but he tries his best, and that's all that matters. After they've both been healing for a few days, Grace actually decides to check the sample that they collected. So he puts it under a microscope in the controlled atmospheric pressure that he's created. After testing, they've determined that there is an organism that's been killing astrophage in that sample. So Dr. Grace names it Tauamoeba because it's an amoeba and it came from the Tau Ceti solar system. He's getting kind of basic with the names now. And this is the perfect discovery because basically they can just breed these predators and then release them into their respective planets' atmospheres in order to bring their astrophage population down. Because remember, the astrophage are taking energy from their solar system's sun. So as soon as they can introduce these predators, hopefully their planets will be saved. So they start breeding the Talmiba so that they have enough of them to test in their respective planets' atmospheres to make sure that they can actually survive outside of their home planet like the astrophage has been able to do. So everything is going great again. Rocky's starting to feel better. Dr. Grace is on the up and up. And now they've found and are breeding the natural predator to the astrophage that is wreaking havoc on the universe. So everything's so good until it isn't. The power in the ship suddenly turns off. All the lights, all the controls. Dr. Grace cannot see what's going on. So Rocky starts directing him around the ship to try to find the generators, but both of the backup generators are not working. So the ship is now being powered by a third emergency source of battery power. And as you and I know, batteries don't last forever, so they need to find a solution quickly. But once Dr. Grace starts taking apart the generators, he realizes that the reason that they're not working is because the Talmiba got into their generators and is killing all the astrophage on the ship. So all of their fuel is being swallowed up as all of this is happening, and there's no way to remove them. So bye-bye to the fuel, they're basically dying, both of them. As soon as Project Hail Mary ends its orbit, they're going to fall to their death, and both of them are going to die along with the solution to the problem that both of their planets need. But then Dr. Grace remembers that he has 4 beetles, which are basically really, really small ships that are meant to store the information needed for planet Earth so that he could basically type it all up and send it back to them. And there was 4 of them just to make sure that the information got to Earth safely. So he uses all 3, and he's just gonna save the one just in case it goes wrong, but he's using those other 3 to connect to the hull of the ship to basically serve as rocket fuel. So instead of the astrophage powering the ship now, the astrophage inside of each beetle is powering the ship. And in each of those beetles, the astrophage is contained, so there's no way that the Talmiba can get into those beetles. So far, this is a good solution and it's safe, but it is a little bit more difficult to control the ship. But they're not gonna die so far. That's as far as I got to, so I don't know if they're gonna die in the end. And I'm also not used to science fiction books, so I don't know if they can just kill the characters and like have the ending of the book happen. So I really don't know what to expect. So I'm a little bit nervous to keep reading, but I'm so happy to report that I'm already 80% through. So it's not gonna be much longer until we hear my final thoughts and the conclusion of the book. So as soon as I get there, you guys will be the first to know. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Hey guys, I'm back with the final update and my final thoughts. Last time we spoke, I was talking about the Talmiba and how they were testing them to make sure that they could survive in both Dr. Grace's solar system and also Rocky's, and turns out they can't. So they literally died. And then Rocky and Dr. Grace were super distraught for a while until they determined that it's actually the nitrogen in both of their atmospheres that is killing the Talmiba. So they devise a plan to breed Talmiba and basically slowly introduce nitrogen so that the Talmiba can build a resistance to the nitrogen. And it actually works. It takes weeks because they're incrementally adding the nitrogen to the Talmiba's environment, but it works. Oh, and also in the past timeline, we actually discovered that Dr. Grace was forced by Strat onto the suicide mission. So he never actually wanted to go on it. And a lot of the reasoning was about his classroom of students, but she forces him onto the ship because they really needed him, apparently. So yeah, that's why he's in space. So back to the present timeline, they've actually developed nitrogen resistant Talmiba that they're going to take back on their individual ships to the planet where the astrophage is breeding in each of their respective solar systems so that they can wipe out that astrophage population so that their planet can survive and strive with the solar power of the sun being hopefully renewed. So that means they have to travel back to Rocky's ship, which is called Blip A, which they successfully do after a little bit of scientific maneuvering. Dr. Grace actually ends up going into his fuel chambers because remember they were attacked by Talmiba. So now there's a bunch of methane, which is basically Talmiba poop, everywhere in his fuel compartment. So he has to scrape it clean and then sterilize it with nitrogen so that he can refill the fuel tanks with astrophage in order to get back home. But he isn't able to clean one of the fuel tanks, so he ends up releasing it into space. So now he only has 6 fuel tanks left. But Rocky is such a talented engineer that he literally just crafts up all 3. So now Dr. Grace actually has all 9 fuel tanks in order to fill with astrophage to go back home. And because of Rocky's help with the fuel tanks, it'll actually only take Grace 3 years and 9 months in order to make it back home. And obviously that's still a lot. He actually is pretty limited on fuel supply, so he's going to have to drink the food that was saved for whenever he was in a coma. It's like basically a slurry of disgusting paste, but it's going to sustain him on the way back home, so he has to suck it up, literally. So now it's time for them to say goodbye, and it's obviously really sad because they've developed a bond at this point. Rocky gets back onto his ship and Grace is in his, and then they separate in the solar system, never to be seen again. Because keep in mind, Grace's life expectancy is gonna expire quickly once he gets back to Earth because he's been gone for so long. And although Rocky might be able to visit Grace, he would never be able to enter the atmosphere, so it's just not realistic that they're going to be longtime friends. So this is kind of a goodbye forever, which is pretty sad. So both Rocky and Grace have Talmiba farms on their ship, where the Talmiba is given a steady supply of astrophage to feed on so that none of them die, and they're contained in exionite containers, and that's the chemical compound that I mentioned way earlier. It's what Rocky uses to make all of the things on his ship. It's basically a clear metal, and on Earth it's only found as a noble gas. So the tanks seem to be working really well until one day, Dr. Grace checks a bucket of astrophage that he keeps on the ship, and it's contaminated with Talmiba. So somehow the Talmiba has escaped from the farm and made its way into the barrel. And after a bunch of testing, Dr. Grace concludes that while he was breeding the Talmiba to be nitrogen resistant, they've also learned how to transverse through the container that they were in. The container that's made of that material that makes up most of Rocky's ship. If the Talmiba is making its way through the xenonite, and that's the material that stores all of Rocky's astrophage, it's safe to assume that pretty soon after they separated in the solar system, all of Rocky's fuel was eaten up by the predator, and now he has no fuel left, just like what happened to Dr. Grace before. So obviously this makes Dr. Grace super scared for Rocky, but if he travels back to where Rocky is to try and help him, he's not going to have enough food to return home. So it will have turned back into a suicide mission. But he does still have the beetles, so he could technically type up all the information, give them the Talmiba, and send it to Earth so that if he does decide to save Rocky, at least Earth will hopefully be saved as well. And ultimately, Dr. Grace decides to go help his brother. The little alien creature that he met, who is now trapped in space. So after 3 months from their initial goodbye, Grace finds Rocky's ship, and it's true, the Talmiba actually ate all of Rocky's fuel supply, so he was stuck in space. But thanks to Grace, they both get on Grace's ship, and they head toward Arendani, which remember, is Rocky's son. And also remember, Grace is almost certainly going to die because he does not have enough food to survive away from Earth for much longer. But then, Rocky suggests that Dr. Grace try to eat the Talmiba. Yup. And he does. And it works! He's able to eat the Talmiba. An amoeba alien life form somehow sustains his life enough, and it does make him like super malnourished because it's not nutritionally balanced, but it does keep him alive long enough to travel to Rocky's home planet and eventually start living there. I can't make this up. I cannot make this up. This is when it got goofy. So basically, Dr. Grace travels back with Rocky, and then we get a flash forward years into the future, and Dr. Grace is living inside a dome on Rocky's home planet. Grace asked them to install 24-hour lights to keep his circadian rhythm balanced, but aside from that, it's really just him in there with a bunch of rocks, and he can't even see outside of his dome because remember, the Iridians don't have eyes, they just perceive through sound, so their entire world is just darkness. That sounds so depressing to me, but apparently Grace is okay with it, and the Iridians have even started modifying their food in order to feed Dr. Grace, and the most disturbing part is that they started testing on his muscle in order to replicate it, so Dr. Grace eats human meat. It's like fake, I guess, because they're basically creating it in a science lab, but he eats me burgers, which are made from the scientifically replicated meat of his body. So I don't know how I feel about that. The best thing though is they managed to clone my muscle tissue and grow it in labs. I can thank Earth Science for that. They were nowhere near that technology when I first showed up, but that was 16 years ago. They're catching up quite well. Anyway, it means I can finally eat meat. Yes, that's right, I'm eating human meat, but it's my own meat, and I don't feel bad about it. Spend a decade eating nothing but odd-tasting, vaguely sweet vitamin shakes, and then see if you'll down a burger. I love me burgers. I eat one every day. So there's that corny little prose again. It definitely came back, and it was present throughout the read, and it wasn't my favorite. I'm gonna be so honest, it was not my favorite. I found it incredibly corny, and like I said, it did grow on me a bit because he gives dad, but I didn't love it. Oh, and also, Dr. Grace's body is basically deteriorating on Rocky's home planet because the atmospheric pressure is so high. I'm sure they controlled it to some extent in the dome, but it's basically giving Grace super bad arthritis, so he walks around with a cane. So in my opinion, his life doesn't seem to be that good on this new planet, but for some reason he's pretty happy with it, and he actually teaches a classroom of Iridian children. Yeah, so I don't know how I feel about that. It's some kind of airlocked room where on one side he plays an organ, like the musical instrument, in order to communicate with the Iridian children on the other side of the glass. And I don't know why, that's just like so weird to me. Rocky, of course, visits Dr. Grace often. There's like a little meeting area on the side of his dome. And one day when Rocky comes over, he bears some news, and it's that Sol, Earth's sun, has officially returned back to its full brightness. So hopefully everyone on Earth is okay. We don't really know what happens happens regarding Earth and the specifics of that situation. Maybe war broke out, maybe people were fighting because there was such an intense famine. We really have no idea. And I do wish we would have got a little bit more clarity about that, but we're kind of just left wondering because I really don't think Rylan is going to go back to Earth. He is able to. The Iridians have told him they have plenty of fuel for him, and his ship is in orbit in their solar system, so they could just get that for him and send him back home. But he would be older than 71 if he went back to Earth, so all of his friends and family are probably dead by now. So yeah, I don't know what I would do in that situation. Let me know in the comments what you would do. It's time for my final rating. I think for now, I'm going to rate this book a 3.5 stars because I really don't think I should look past how corny I thought the book was at the beginning and also how little wrap up we got regarding Earth by the end. And finally, the ending was just so weird to me. Like the me burgers of it all, the teaching Iridians, the being okay with living in a dome decorated by rocks in the pitch black darkness. I don't know. He's braver than I am, I guess, but also I don't respect how easily he gave up on his kids. Like he made that such a big part of his personality, but to not care about his kids enough to leave the classroom and never come back ever is kind of insane to me. So yeah, that's how I feel about the book. If you guys have read it, please let me know. And if you're going to watch the movie, come back after watching it and leave a comment so we can talk about our experience with it all because I would love to know your take. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you in my next video.